have not heard any other companies where the largest outages are taken so seriously by everyone, the whole leadership chain.
Operational excellence and dives deep and all these kind of things tie in together. And there's this culture, which, sometimes people complain about like new external hires. Sometimes Amazon has had these pockets of a bunch of VPs hired from a different company where they don't join the on-call, don't join the Sev1. And it's like, oh my God, these bad external people who don't understand how we do things. But I would say, yeah, the longtime Amazonians, like we would sometimes have, for example, in AWS, you'd have the engineers call where they're all discussing fixes. And then sort of separately, like there's also the VP, SVP call of like, give us the updates, what's the current status? And some of this is a scale thing, right? Like Netflix is down in like half the country because there's some global networking outage. And we're like talking to the backbone providers, trying to get them to fix things faster. We're telling them exactly where the backbone broke because our alerts are much better than theirs. I was shocked sometimes. The connections that you have and the data you have sometimes are so mind-bogglingly big.
What is it like to work at Amazon as a software engineer? Dave Anderson was an engineering manager and director of engineering at Amazon for more than 12 years. He's now retired and so can speak with more candor than usual. In our conversation, we cover engineer and manager career levels at Amazon from L4 to L10, the interview process for engineers, and Amazon's unique bar raiser interview, Amazon's infamous PIP/underperformer target, and how performance management actually plays out, on-call and incident management inside Amazon, and many more topics. If you're interested in understanding how Amazon works differently than most big tech companies, and why startups often have success in hiring engineers and engineering leaders from Amazon, this episode is for you. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe to the podcast on any podcast platform and on YouTube. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So you worked at Amazon as an engineering manager, how is Amazon called? SDM?
SDM. Yeah. I started off as an SDM and then went up that engineering management chain.
So you're a software development manager. Before we get into what it's like to work as a dev manager there, you manage and work with a lot of software engineers.
Yep.
What is it like to be a software developer, and what levels does Amazon have for devs and also for managers, and how do they overlap?
Yeah, the numbers overlap except for so when you get hired out of college, like the entry level that lasts like a year and a half to sometimes more years is level 4. That's for whatever reason we start at level 4 for engineers. Then there's level 5, which is like the beginnings of middle level engineer, which equates to the first level of SDM. Amazon technically has SDM at level 5 and 6. Level 5 is more rare, and it's more for, you almost want to call it junior, except no one would want to call it junior SDM because it'd be a little insulting. That's actually where I started. So there's level 5, and then level 6 is what you might call a senior software engineer or a software development manager, which is like the software development manager. Level 6 is the most common management position where you manage a 2-pizza team. You own your space, and you usually don't have managers underneath you. And that's senior software engineer, which is where I would say a lot of software engineering careers end, as in that's a senior position. You could almost equate it to like a level 6 manager has a level 6 engineer in a perfectly designed team, which is a level 6 engineer, which sort of be the head engineer for a team. And then you hit level 7 at Amazon, which is principal software engineer. And they would theoretically be over a group of teams, the lead, sort of directing, and as you could imagine, as you get to like larger groups, you get to more broad ownership. So a principal engineer wouldn't be necessarily focused on one system because you're theoretically leading across multiple teams. So you get more and more architecture, bigger scale designs, things like that. And that equates to level 7 manager, which is senior software development manager, which would be a manager of managers, the first level where you're really managing multiple teams. Then you get to level 8, which is senior principal engineer, which is just more senior, bigger orgs, bigger scope, et cetera, which equates to director for development management. And then you get up to level 10, because there's no 9 for whatever reason. I don't know if I ever got a straight answer on why there's no 9. It was like, this idea of like a senior director position that never got created. But anyway, you jump up to 10 and you get to distinguished engineer or VP, which is sort of, the pinnacle of where any of us normal humans would get to.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, SCIM provisioning, and fine-grained authorization. That's where WorkOS comes in, making it fast and painless to add enterprise features to your app. Their APIs are easy to understand, and you can ship quickly and get back to building other features. WorkOS also provides a free user management solution called AuthKit for up to 1 million monthly active users. It's a drop-in replacement for Auth0 and comes standard with useful features like domain verification, role-based access control, bot protection, and MFA. It's powered by Radix components, which means zero compromises in design. You get limitless customizations as well as modular templates designed for quick integrations. Today, hundreds of fast-growing startups are powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know, like Cursor, Vercel, and Perplexity. Check it out at workos.com to learn more. That is workos.com. This episode is brought to you by Modal, the cloud platform that makes AI development simple. Need GPUs without the headache? With Modal, just add one line of code to any Python function and boom, it's running in the cloud on your choice of CPU or GPU. And the best part, you only pay for what you use. With sub-second container starts and instant scaling to thousands of GPUs, it's no wonder companies like Suno, Ramp, and Substack already trust Modal for their AI applications. Getting an H100 is just a pip install away. Go to modal.com/pragmatic to get $30 in free credits every month. That is modal.com/pragmatic. Why do you think it starts with L for? This is so strange because at Google, Uber, I think even potentially Stripe, it all starts at L3. It's also for a historic reason, but L4 at most companies is like the mid-level engineer, and here at Amazon, it's the entry-level one.
And I don't even know why. Like it's not like we don't have different pay scales. So I'm pretty sure if you get to the FCs, that I don't remember the levels for the FC workers, that there's like 1, 2, and 3, and like their leveling starts
stand for
fulfillment center. Sorry,
fulfillment center.
So when you get to the fulfillment centers, of which I've had very little to do in my career, so like once in a while I'd touch on something. So I'm pretty sure that their levels start lower, and if you get to a few weird positions like QAT was a position which I don't know exists anymore. It existed and then didn't, and then existed again and didn't. So I don't know what the current status is. It was a quality assurance tester, which is like a not like QAE, which is quality assurance engineer. They would be level 3. So there's weird quirks where you'd touch level 3 once in a while, but for the most part, yeah, Amazon just starts off at level 4. No idea why they decided their numbering schemes needs to start there.
And how easy or difficult are promotions? I think you kind of alluded a little bit to that when you said that a lot of people get stuck at L6, which is the senior level.
Yeah, I would say the 4 to 5 for engineers isn't too bad at all, or for just about any position. I mean, there's level 4s for some other roles, but I would say that's not too hard if you're competent. You complete your projects on time. You hit like 2 years in or so on most teams, and they're just going to end up promoting you. Like, hey, look, because the idea of like a level 4 is sort of like you need assistance. Imagine hiring someone straight out of college. Like, there's very few college hires who are competent enough to be handed a project and actually work on it. It's just think about how you were in college. Like you finished. Are you really ready to work on like large scale work now? Like someone's sitting over your shoulder, helping you, explaining what you're doing wrong. Like, don't forget to test before you push. So level 5 is sort of like you can be trusted to work on a project, not a huge project, but a decent sized project at the start of level 5, at least, on your own. So hopefully after a year and a half or 2 years of work, you've repeatedly demonstrated that you can work on your own. So you're promoted to level 5. Past that, you get to a lot harder. So there's this very detailed document of the criteria for what's the difference between level 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7 for every position at Amazon, actually. Like there's a big archive in SharePoint last I saw, which was just these detailed of like at level 5, and it describes it in fairly good detail. I mean, hand wavy as you could imagine in terms of a project with the scope of a team, a project with the scope of multiple teams.
Yeah.
So those are actually what's mostly used when managers go to write promotions. So Amazon's, in comparison to a lot of companies, Amazon has a very document culture. I mean, for everything, including projects.
The famous 6-pagers, right?
Yeah. And so you write a famous 6-pager for promotions as well. And so
even for promotions.
Even for promotions, and it's actually I would say one of the aspects that's the hardest for managers. And one of the big differentiators between having a good manager and not is, and one of the reasons you want a manager who can write, is that your promotion document is the thing that gets you promoted or not. I'll just contrast that quickly with, I worked at Facebook for a bit, Meta now. And I remember being in OLR there, and a manager said, like, oh, my engineer's so good, they really need to be promoted to level 6. And a couple of people said, yeah, you sure? Like, yeah, I remember I heard they were good. It's like, yeah, they're good. Okay, sounds good. Moving on. And I'm flabbergasted. I was just like, my mind was blown. I'm like, are you kidding me? Because at Amazon, what you have is this document which has like a lot of required fields where you have to explain, like, write this big narrative. First of all, there's some like normal fields of like how long's their time in position, which again is like a criteria to look at and say like, oh, only 13 months. That's not very long. Are you really sure you can promote them that fast? Like this, it's a very, it's a hard process to get through, let's say.
Yeah.
But then you have to write this narrative, multi-page narrative explaining how they meet the criteria of the next level. So, everyone has the doc of, here's what a level 6 engineer does. You have to be able to read through that, understand what the criteria is, and then you have a narrative where you explain how they've done that thing at the next level repeatedly. And then you need quite a few people at the next level or higher saying that they believe you have met the criteria for the next level, and they usually have to give some anecdotes of why they're pretty convinced that you should be promoted. And so level 4 to 5 is pretty darn easy. Again, like you say, they completed this project, and this project, and then a few level 5 engineers will write down saying, yeah, totally cool, thumbs up. By the time you get to like level 7 to level 8, like it is serious amounts of documentation, years worth of project completion. You have to have a lot of VPs and directors on your doc writing out narrative blocks of text explaining all the things they've done with you. And so I would say that each level you go up, it gets, I would probably say exponentially harder to get promoted, which is why 4 to 5 is not a big deal. 5 to 6 is a pretty big promotion. 6 to 7 is super damn hard. Like it's already hitting like levels of slightly less bad for management, which I can explain in a second why, but principals have like additional hurdles they have to get past, sort of unfairly in my mind. Like technical assessments of exactly what they've done by multiple principals who seem to have incentive to say no. It's really tough. And so and I would say in ways that makes it have the wrong incentives for managers, one of the big things for managers is how big is their team. Because if you're a level 6 manager, and over time, your team scope has grown and you eventually got some more managers reporting to you, and then they get more engineers, and then you start getting more managers, more engineers, and someone looks at your team and says, this dude has 55 people reporting to him and he's level 6. Like that makes no sense. We really need to promote them. So managers have this sort of artificial pressure and incentive to get their teams larger, which is until recently was one of the big things almost everyone did was like, a huge part of your job as a manager to grow your career was just grow your scope. Figure out more projects, more teams, more everything else.
You could take on, more initiatives.
You can almost guarantee a promotion if you just grow your team enough. Yeah.
Incentives are an interesting thing. Yeah. But taking a step back, we talked about what it's like to be inside Amazon and get hired in there. How do you get hired as an engineer, and what is the interview process? Is it the pretty standard, the ones we know what Google and Meta does, the algorithmical coding interview, etc., or are there some unique things for Amazon?
For the most part, I would say it was very, very similar. In fact, I would say at least when I went to Facebook, I was there for about a week and I started getting added to interview loops because they heard I was a bar raiser at Amazon, which I'll explain bar raiser in a second for anyone who doesn't know. But I got added to the loops and I was like, oh my God, this is the exact same thing. Like everyone's doing the same thing. It's extremely similar. At least the groups I was in, I was just added to the loops. It was exactly the same. Nothing was different. So for the most part, with some exceptions, interview loops are, you have 5 people. You do a phone screen. They just sort of check whatever they feel like checking to make sure that you're like a vaguely competent candidate. And then you have an interview loop of usually 5 people, of which 4 is usually on the team or closely related to the team. And then 1 person's the bar raiser, who is essentially a third-party person who can veto a hire decision. And they also are running the loop, as in you're putting someone who's very experienced interviewer on the loop to make sure that everything goes well, everyone interviews well, that the loop is set up correctly. and they have the ability to say no. Is like their special power. And so,
but they cannot say yes, right? So they're not the hiring. Who says yes? Is it the hiring manager?
So a yes requires a yes from the hiring manager and the bar raiser. So it's like a combo decision. So either one of them can say no and it doesn't happen. Now, in reality, once you're there long enough, there's lots of ways to get around that as both not as a hiring manager. You can't really get around the bar raiser, but as a bar raiser, a few times I've had hiring managers saying no. I'm like, that's cool. I'll just pass them off to my friend here. Who's a hiring manager. like, dude, quick, before anyone else gets them. Because sometimes hiring managers have weird opinions. But yeah, for the most part, it has to be a yes from both the hiring manager and the bar raiser.
And then, like, I think we can all imagine, the interview going through as a candidate. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you apply to Amazon, you have the first screening, you're through, you're put on to, maybe you have a technical pre-screening, but then you have the on-site or. Yep. It might be virtual, but you'll probably have coding, architecture, hiring manager, maybe multiples of some of these. You have all these interviews, which we talked with all these people. You probably think you did great on some, you did terrible on some. What happens behind the scenes? How does a debrief happen?
So the loop is set up, and there's at no point, Amazon's very bad at consistency across all of Amazon. So everything, just about everything I say has a grain of salt. The only thing is not just like, yes, bar raisers are always included. But other than that, like, I don't know how many times I've said, this is the way you do things. And someone else is like, not at all. You're totally wrong, which is funny because like we're both wrong. It's just, I worked in a good number of groups. So I have fair confidence that I've been in, like 6 groups at Amazon. So like very different orgs. So I have a pretty good idea of what's consistent. You set up a loop for engineers, for example, you would have usually like 2 coding interviews, a design interview. If it's a senior engineer, you'd add an architecture interview, and then at least one leadership principle style interview, which is like checking your leadership skills. Level 4 interviews are sometimes a little different because they have no leadership because they're college hires, and like it's a little bit of a waste of time to spend much time asking them about times they've had conflicts with coworkers. It's like, well, they've had no coworkers. They lived in a dorm. Like I've heard some really weird stories when I try to ask those kind of questions. This one time my roommate was staying up really late at night and I had a test in the morning. I'm like, okay, maybe we just move on. So in normal interviews with experienced people, you have all these things. Everyone takes detailed notes on both the questions they ask and the answers they give and your interpretation. Like there's 3 parts of a good interview notes, and everyone takes notes. You interview independently. You shouldn't be talking in between the interviews. Like each interviewer does their thing, and you take these notes. Then you get into what we have as a debrief, a discussion about the candidate. So the bar raiser leads that meeting. You start off the meeting. For the most part, you started off by saying, okay, everyone read. So you all start reading, and you read. Which takes time. It's just like
typical across Amazon, right? A lot of meetings.
Yeah, Amazon's document culture here. It's like you start off, you say everyone read, and you're going to spend, like if you have depending on how long the debrief is, half an hour, like you sit there and you read the questions, you read the candidate's answers, you read the interpretation of those answers. And then how the rest of it proceeds is very much up to the bar raiser and like their org and like how they tend to do things. I usually would say like, some version of, now that you've read all the feedback, are you changing? Part of the interview notes is what is your vote for hire or not hire? And so I would sort of carefully go around and say like, what are your current thoughts on hire or no hire? Not like, I would usually not say, are you going to change your mind? Because people are reluctant to change their mind. I like to say just like, now what are your current thoughts? You've read all the feedback. And you sort of get an idea of like, where is the room landing in, I would probably say like 90% of the cases, it's not all yes or all no. I would say almost always there's at least one no and one yes, even on the worst or best candidates. And so you preferably then go through and try to pressure test both directions of like, what happens if we don't hire this person? Like, are we missing something really good? Or what happens if we hire this person? What's the big risk that we're overlooking? And the bar raiser's main job is to make sure you have a really good discussion, that you don't overly obsess with one little bit of feedback. Sometimes people are like, oh my God, I hated that answer. Yeah, we need to say no. And it's like, okay, that was one sentence given by the candidate for one of the interviewers. Like, let's try not to obsess over that too much. But in fact, like as what you said was, sometimes you almost always you'll have a good interview and a bad interview. Like that's extremely common. And so hopefully what the bar raiser is doing is making sure you have a good discussion over like everything seen. And one of the reasons, in fact, why we do 2 coding interviews almost always is because it gives you more chances to have good answers. I don't know how many times I've heard, oh yeah, they couldn't code their way out of a paper bag. And the other person says, they did just fine for me. And now you have a good discussion. Like, why do we get 2 very different answers? What exactly did they put as their answer for the other person? Let's compare them. Let's take a look. What kind of hints did you give? What kind of hints did you not give? Then you just try to arrive at the idea of like, should we have them or not?
So is it fair to say that the bar raiser tries to, make the debrief a bit more fair, even out things, compensate for less experienced interviewers and maybe some of their biases, given the bar raiser it's both an experienced interviewer, but is there like a special like training or like how do you become a bar raiser?
Yeah, for the most part, so you, again, org-wide, like there's a lot of differences across Amazon. For the most part, it's like once you've had 100 plus interviews, sometimes 50, you can start training, but like usually 100-ish interviews is when you get to train as a bar raiser. And for the most part, the training is you watch a bar raiser do their thing for a while, and then you start to do the bar raiser thing while they watch and then criticize you behind your, later on. Criticize. And that can last anywhere from like 10 interviews to I've seen 50 or plus more of like, they keep watching them and saying they're still not ready to do this on their own. Depending on how picky the bar raiser is and or how bad the person in training is. But for the most part, I would say in a lot of my interviews, I had more time interviewing than everyone else combined. And so a lot of the bar raisers do have 400, 500, 600 interviews under their belt. And a lot of the interviewers have done 10, 15, 20. Like, so you are not just like a bit more trusted, you are wildly more experienced than other people on the loop. And so very frequently you're both a sort of a louder voice in the room in terms of people can just trust your opinion on these things, but also I will look at their question, I don't know how many times I've seen like the question, the candidate's answer, and then their interpretation I think is wrong. I'm like, that's actually a pretty good answer. I can see where they were going with this. And you're like, absolutely wrong. And I'm thinking, that's actually not wrong. It's an interesting, it wasn't the approach you liked, but I actually see where they were going with that. And I think it was fine. So I would say that that's sort of where the bar raiser like thing comes in, is like trying to, like you said, sort of fair, like a fair evaluation of a candidate. Because we're not trying to hire people who have the exact answer you have, like that, they want to hear. What you want to hire is people who can come up with good answers as they work here for many years. And so, one of the things you're looking for example, is more of like growth, the possibility of growth. Like, is this person willing to hear things? Sometimes it'll be in the first interview, they said this, by the last interview, they said this other thing. I'm like, that's interesting. Like they're already pivoting their answer, sort of recognizing what we want to hear. That's totally fine with me. Like if they recognize ownership is sort of a key leadership principle and they sort of switch their answers to demonstrate more ownership, great. Like that's sort of what you want, is people who can change their mind over time.
Awesome. So once you get hired and you start inside of Amazon, back in your day, what was the kind of tooling stack? And I know it's changing these days because I'm hearing more and more of it is pretty much AWS, which is super unique across all of the companies, by the way. Like, Google doesn't use GCP internally, and Microsoft is starting to use Azure a little bit, but not nearly as much. And, Meta has their own thing. I would say it changed. It was changing over time, and it was actually one of the interesting things, like I was mentioning before, of people would say like, you're totally wrong. Like no one used that. There were homegrown like web hosting stuff that we used in Marketplace back in the time, which was like originally was Groupa and then was multiple versions of new web hosting platforms that teams were building on. And you get over to AWS and they're like, well, obviously everyone's using all AWS systems now to build things. And I thought it was sort of funny because it's like, obviously we're all using this, and like, no, a lot of teams weren't yet. And then you move over to IDOs and devices and like the mobile stacks. And that was pretty much using straight up like the development tools that need to be used, by Apple and by Google in terms of like the Android development system and stuff. And so it was highly dependent on what stack you're building on. Is it like a homegrown web hosting platform, or are we building,
AWS tools, or are we building devices? And that's one of the reasons, like when we talk about like a job I didn't mention of the bar racers is also, for example, I've seen people complain that a candidate only coded in Python for their answers. And definitely a bar raiser answer for that is we don't care what language they code in, because every time you change jobs, you're frequently going to use different tools. Like there's just such a wide selection of tools. And again, there's some homegrown, some AWS, and you want people to pivot to different tools. You want them to be able to say, sure, I'll flip to Kotlin or something for coding, because why not? This team does it. Or this software stack we've decided to switch. And you want them to, for the most part, we want engineers to be fungible, to be able to switch over. And, you move over to, we had some like not C++, but C code inside of one of the AWS teams I was on, for example, and which as a side note was sort of funny because I think I knew more C than a lot of the engineers because I'm old enough to like, that's what I was learning in college.
Oh yeah.
And so I remember them saying something about like stupid memory management. And I'm like, wait, C? I'm like, cool. I haven't looked at the code in a while. That's not a SDM thing at Amazon. But I'm going to look at this. Like, I'm sort of curious because like you're suddenly flipping back into my wheelhouse now that you're looking at really old code.
One thing I've kind of heard a few horror stories about Amazon is on-call and how brutal it can be. Like, what is on-call like? How is it organized? How important is it? And I think we all know, or most of us will know about Amazon's customer obsession. How does that translate onto on-call?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting, and also I would say one of the more interesting differences between like Facebook and Amazon. So at least in the teams I was on in Meta, like there's no emergency support. It's, there's a completely separate team that was dealing with emergencies. I think that's true of Google as well. At Amazon, it was like, it's a core aspect of most teams' way that they operate is if you wrote the code, you're also supporting it in production. And not just like when we talk about supporting, we're talking about literally you're the one deciding which fleets host your code and which data centers and how distributed you need to be and how are you sharding your database and all this kind of stuff. Like it's very, the ownership stack or the ownership leadership principle comes into play on a lot of this stuff. But that also means that your team, in most cases, sets up a rotation where there's someone responding to emergencies in real time when emergencies happen. And the philosophy behind it is if there's problems with your software, you want the problems to land on the people who know it best. And the pain of bad software lands on the people who have the responsibility to fix it. And so there's this, when done well, and there's a couple of caveats there. When done well, I really appreciate it. Like as a manager of a team, I've been paged in way too many times at 1 or 2 a.m. because there was a problem. But also, I believe that managed well, you go into work 2 days later after a couple big emergency nights and we say, okay, we're stopping all feature development and we're fixing these problems, right? That's like the done well part is we are not patching this. We are not setting it to reboot every night to fix it. We're not letting people get paged at 2 a.m. because that's ridiculous. So we're going to fix it right now. We're going to rewrite this code, whatever. I would say like contrast in the negative way, there were some systems at Facebook. I remember people talking about like, oh, they've been having problems for months. Like they're just restarting this thing constantly. Some point in time, we'll get someone to fix it. And I was like, that's interesting because at least the teams I ran, we would have fixed that thing right away because it would like, you would lose your mind if your system was always having errors like this. On the other side, like the poorly run teams where you hear like, it's been 9 months now and everyone is paged 2 or 3 times a night. Anytime they're on rotation, they never sleep because they're getting paged every single night. That's just a nightmare. Like that's just not okay. No. Things are broken there. Like that's a management problem. I think more than anything. So yeah. So the rotation is usually on most teams. Let's say you have a team of like 7 people. 7's a good, maybe 8. 8 people. You usually have someone go on rotation for a week. And for that week, you're responsible for responding to emergencies. On most of my teams, that would be, let's just say like 2 times in that week, you would be paged sometime off hours. A lot of times it's 9 p.m. Frequently, it's when code gets pushed. So if you are pushing your code at 10 p.m., which is a common enough time of like, hey, we have a downtime in traffic. Let's push the code and make sure it works. The pager goes off. It's not a big deal. I think when you have a team having issues and you're getting paged 2 or 3 times every night, that's just a nightmare. But again, most of the time that was fixed pretty quickly. Like the engineers aren't okay with it. Hopefully the manager's not okay with it. And then you get it resolved.
Yeah. Well, I think there's always a downside of being too close to the problems, right? Because you do have to be responsive. But if it's set up in a way that you're actually paged for things that truly matter to, like, let's say customers, you're now going to fix it faster. I think, we've all used software where like there were some annoying bugs, and you can tell when it's there like months later that is not paging anyone inside of it. No. They might not even know about it.
Or the people with, and I think it's like, can you tie responsibility for your schedule, like in terms of like, what are you working on next? Tie that to the responsibility of responding to problems, and tie that to the responsibility of having a good customer obsession. And that's where it's done well, right? As I sometimes have to remind people over and over again. Like I'd hear from an engineer like, oh yeah, that was such a hard on-call last week. And I wasn't paying attention as a manager or something, or maybe I'm the senior manager. And I'd be like, what do you mean like last week? And I have to go like quickly run a report because usually managers not paged into everything unless it escalates. Like if they can't fix it within 10 minutes, then I get paged or something. And they say, oh yeah, I got paged 8 times last week. And I'm like, well, what did you have to fix? They say, oh, we haven't had a chance to fix it yet. And you're like, oh my God, like, dude, why are we working on anything else if you're getting paged 7 times in a week? Like, that's not okay. So I usually would say, like, you should only be okay with being on an on-call rotation if you also have the capability of saying that this is the next most important thing we're all going to work on. So I think it's not fair when you put responsibility on people if you don't give them the authority to also redirect your resources. Those things have to come together. And so I would say most teams at Amazon had that. And certainly there were teams where they felt like they were helpless and just had a terrible time of it. But well-run teams, you would say, like, they're not going to be okay with, again, a bad operational situation.
And then when outages happen, what is the categorization? I think there's different levels between the severity of the outage, right? So like a page comes in, someone decides, the on-call decides that if it's an outage, and then they have to assign a level to it. How does that work?
Yeah, and it was different across teams a little bit of like what the exact severity meant, again, because Amazon hates consistency in all ways. And for the most part, I love the lack of consistency because you can just invent things and just tell. One of my favorite things as a side note was someone would say like, that they're doing something and I don't like it, right? And I would say, I'll quickly go edit our wiki and write in a rule against whatever they just did. And then say like, as you can see here in this document, that's not allowed. And then they would look at the wiki and say, well, that's true. Okay. And I'm like, I was never called on to the fact that I just edited like the rule set or the instructions or the step-by-step whatever that I just like edited and then showed them the instructions. It was great how people just believe these things. That was like a bar raiser thing too. It's like, that's not allowed. And I am the bar raiser, so I would know these things. And like, oh, okay, cool.
Smart hack.
Oh man. Yeah. With confidence, you can get past almost everything if you need to. But yeah, so most of the time in most teams, there's severity 1 through 5. And 5 means we're never going to fix anything because it's not, doesn't matter at all. Most things are like level 3, which is, it's a problem. You should work on it someday. Severity 2 and 1 are the ones that would like page people, make people pay attention, make their phones freak out. Severity 2 and 1 are just emergencies. And for the most part, severity 2 is what we use for most things. Severity 1 is like company-wide emergency, is sort of, Sev 1, was usually like the phrasing for it. In certain groups, like, let's say AWS, in Sev 2 is there's a system problem and we need to fix it, and you'll probably let your manager know. Sev 1 is usually like, this is where so for a while I was on the on-call rotation of manager. You get paged instantly for Sev 1s. It was like, you would have a big list. You could set up a distribution list where a whole bunch of people would get alerted for your Sev 1, including maybe your VP, maybe your SVP. for AWS style Sev ones, that was frequently like I was writing to Jassy right away with a list of other SVPs and VPs on the list saying we have an AWS outage, like blah blah blah.
So I actually have a really interesting story. One of the reasons I asked this, we had a senior director join from Amazon. He was a senior director there, and he became the senior director of
That's not a job.
of my group.
Amazon doesn't have senior directors. That's that level 9 thing that doesn't exist.
Okay, well, I'm not.
No,
maybe this person was a director. And anyway,
people like to invent their own titles.
or maybe it was a director who became a senior director, but he was a senior director, which meant that he had about like 300 engineers in his group. And we had an outage. So my team was payments, and the way Uber did it, so Amazon Sev1 was L5. Like first L1 was the smallest, and L3 is internal. L4 is like, it's just the opposite. So L5 is the highest is when it's actually company wide. So it impacts the whole product. We're actually losing revenue or something like that. And then there's like levels. There's like low, high, medium, or high. And my team pretty frequently had an L5 low outage, which meant that payments were down in one part of the world. Typically, we had a third-party issue. Let's say one of the payment methods in India just stopped working because the thing had an outage there. And it was pretty routine for us. Like this is something that we couldn't do anything about beyond alert the third party. And so we were just having one of these things, and we always have a call. It's kind of routine. Like everyone's just sitting there bored. So like, okay, have you guys paged the third party? Yeah, we paged. Suddenly, this new director is in the call saying, "All right, what's the situation? Can I help anyone here?" And I'm like, "It's like Jeff, what are you doing here?" He's like, "This is L5, right? It's the highest one, right? Like it's like step one."
Yep.
I was like, "Yeah, it is." He's like, "Okay, I'm here. Use me. How can we put out the fire?" So then I learned that at Amazon, VPs jump onto Sev1, and we were just having really casual, like for us, like an L5 wasn't really like this. We just knew this was just our regular L5 because we had to follow. We couldn't do anything about it, but it just made me realize how Amazon taken it way more seriously. And this senior director like jumped out of some important meeting to go there, and for me, it was just like, whoa, like this is new for me. Yeah. So it just shows. It gave me a sense of how serious Amazon seems, and I have not seen any other companies, or have not heard any other companies where the largest outages are taken so seriously by everyone, the whole leadership chain. So I think that's it's a bit of a story there.
Operational excellence and dives deep and all these kind of things tie in together. So and there's this culture. Which, sometimes people complain about like new external hires. Sometimes Amazon has had these pockets of like, a bunch of VPs hired from a different company where they don't join the on-call, don't join the Sev1. And it's like this, like, oh my God, like these bad external people who don't understand how we do things. But I would say, the longtime Amazonians, like we would sometimes have, for example, in AWS, you'd have the engineers call where they're all discussing fixes. And then sort of separately, like there's also the VP, SVP call of like, give us the updates. What's the current status? And some of this is a scale thing, right? Like Netflix is down. Like we're sitting there and like Netflix is down in like half the country because there's some global networking outage. And we're like trying to also Amazon scale. We're talking to the backbone providers, trying to get them to fix things faster. We're telling them exactly where the backbone broke because our alerts are much better than theirs. Like I was shocked sometimes at like the connections that you have and the data you have sometimes are so mind-bogglingly big. And, it's like you see the news articles coming out, and it's like we know about the backbone outage in whatever place because we can see exactly where it is in the network based on all of our alerts and alarms and all that kind of stuff. But it was very expected that depending on the scale of your outage or issue going on, that your VP would be joining in the call. If not usually to run it unless it's really important, but definitely like what you want, and which is what you usually have, is we need X done and you need it done right now. Yep. And that's the kind of thing a VP or director or whoever the really senior person is around for is like, oh, okay, we need the kind of thing that would come up sometimes is like, oh my God, we need 100 extra servers right now, these big beefy things. We need them provisioned immediately in Dublin. And they say, okay, I'm calling that, the head of EC2 right now on the phone, and we're going to get that, some engineer to allocate those to us in the next about 2 minutes. And so boom, 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 they get this thing done, and a bunch of servers are turning on, because the person can do the direct call and just say, I need this right now. And they say, got it. So I think that's useful.
I mean, it sounds to me, if like this might sound a bit like cheeky, but if you get it to Amazon, and usually being on an outage, you don't really want to be on an outage as an engineer. But if you're in one of these outages and it already happened, it's kind of an awesome opportunity.
Oh,
I mean, where else would you be able to even experience this?
I've heard from, I believe, like if you're talking about like building skills in terms of like running software, not like just writing software, but like running software, right? If you want to go to a startup and run software, you hire, like if you get an Amazon engineer who's been in the thick of things, sometimes it's like, you're not just good at writing software, but you've seen what happened. Like Twilio calls, I got on the phone with, the CTO of Twilio, VoIP company. It's like, we're having this issue. It's in this specific region, and we have engineers in the room. We're talking to them on the phone in a separate phone call from the engineers, talking about whatever tests they're running on whatever trace routes and figuring things out. And like the skills you build in terms of product and what can we ask the customer to do? Can we ask them to test something? Can we get access to their host so we can try something out? It's such a cool experience. I think it sucks that it's happening at 3 a.m. sometimes, but I would say most of the time it's not, because usually problems happen when you push code. So just the way things work. Funny thing of like the amount of pages that happen when Amazon historically did lockdown sometime around Thanksgiving time, you would just stop pushing code changes out, and this exponential drop off in pages because changes are what breaks things in the world. But yeah, no, I think the experience, you talk 2 years later about like, oh, we had such a good time on the team together, didn't we? You always talk about the outages and stuff because that was the exciting times at work.
Yeah. One interesting thing about Amazon that's also just Amazon is famous for and people get surprised for is frugality. Yeah. Can you tell me what engineers experience, or what did engineers complain to you who joined from like companies that were a bit more generous? I worked at Uber, I visited friends at Google, Meta. You have like these just kind of standard perks like lunch. I think at Uber we had like these vending machines. You could get like whatever, like mice,
free stuff from the vending machines. Our vending machines
hardware,
had profit. Yeah, they there got a profit from our vending machines. It wasn't even like a cost. Oh my God, yeah. I think Amazon, and there is some interesting points that sometimes we had these arguments of like, oh my God, like the amount of money that you pay engineers, why can't you be a little bit more generous? And some of it comes down to frupidity, like the stupid frugal thing. It's just like just this ridiculous, stupid level of frugality. But sometimes there is interesting explanations because Amazon has fulfillment centers, and we have the majority of Amazon's workers are very, very low margin per person. You can't afford to, and then they talk about, for I think legal and other reasons, that they can't offer different benefits and different things, perks to corporate workers versus fulfillment workers. Whether or not that's legal, whether or not that's just like now we're at risk for unions forming across the world because they're giving unfair benefits to corporate workers. You look at something like 401k match, for example, was something that came up. It was like, couldn't we just do double the match, do 100% of whatever? And they're like, yeah, we could for engineers, but we definitely can't afford that for FC workers because our margin there is like 0.5%. If we give them any more money, we're losing money on every item Amazon sells. Like we have to be very, very careful. It's super expensive to have a million workers. I mean, for good reason. Like it's just expensive. So when you try to give comparable benefits to corporate workers, and you have these issues. But then you get to just how Amazon operates is, unless there's a really damn good reason to spend the money, we don't do it. And that's the same thing for resources. I think if you had to choose, I guess as a business owner, a person who wants a company to be successful, you would definitely want your company to be frugal. Like the amount of money wasted when I was at Facebook, it just blew my mind. I mean, just some things are great. It's very relaxing to get free food. It's very, and no big deal, like in comparison to the amount you're paid. Like you calculate it out and it's like, okay, what, a few $1,000s a year spent per person on food compared to their salary is nothing. So why not do it? But then you get to just like the stupid levels of waste of like building products that no one needs or something like that. And at Amazon, I kept being like, oh my God, we would never. I remember saying once, like, this project looks like a duplicate of this other project. Shouldn't we shut it down? When I was at Facebook, shouldn't we shut it down? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And like, why would we shut it down? I'm like, well, because we're wasting money. And they're like, so we have billions. Like, what? Like, it was just kind of like confusion over like, why would we not build something pointlessly just for fun? And very deep in Amazon's culture is this like, we do things efficiently. Now, sometimes you're doing things efficiently to launch something faster. So you'll rewrite someone's code because it's faster than integrating with theirs or something. Like, you're always balancing speed of building versus efficiency of resources and all that kind of stuff. But I think if your answer is always, unless there's a strong reason to do it, let's not do it, leads to like at least the first half of my tenure at Amazon, engineers would get like one monitor of only 16 inches or something ridiculous. And like literally, and it was both hilarious, but also frustrating. It was like an intern would leave, and before the IT group came up to take their equipment, it was like the sharks would swim in, and all the engineers would run over and take their equipment, take their extra keyboard, take their monitor and stuff, because they wanted 2 monitors. And the only way to get it is to steal someone else's.
Yeah, that was like, a stupidity. But
oh my God, it was so stupid.
Well, but I think it is good context, like just understanding where the company is coming from, and that it is a unique setup in the sense that there are so many fulfillment center workers, which most companies do not have, and they don't have this. So
and over time they to fix things. I mean, data driven. I've been on teams where they wrote 6-pager explaining why they needed, the top of the line Mac Pros instead of the middle grade Mac Pros, and they explained the productivity benefits. And someone said, oh, "Okay, now you've explained it." Like finally, someone came up with an actual math reason, not just like we would like it, and boom, everyone got their stuff and we moved on. But I would say like if you had to choose between frugality and not frugality, you'd want frugality. It just makes things operate better when you spend money on the things that need to be spent on and not waste time elsewhere. But it definitely can be frustrating.
Trust isn't just earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned security professional scaling your governance, risk, and compliance program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or more complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta can help you start or scale your security program by connecting with auditors and experts to conduct your audit and set up your security program quickly. Plus, with automation and AI throughout the platform, Vanta gives your time back so you can focus on building your company. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. With Vanta, they centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Join over 9,000 global companies to manage risk and prove security in real time. For a limited time, my listeners get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/pragmatic. That is vanta.com/pragmatic for $1,000 off. Now, one thing, when I did my Amazon deep dive on Amazon's engineering culture, one of the most negative things that came up was Amazon's so-called URA target, unregulated attrition target, which, if rumors have it that every year about 6% of staff is expected to leave as unregulated attrition, and what this results in is basically focus plans, which is what comes before PIP, and there's PIPs, and the people I have like friends at Amazon, and many of them mentioned that either they were on a PIP or they had someone else be on a PIP. There is a bit of a scare, uncertainty, especially for people entering Amazon. You were on the other side of this. You were a manager, plus you were also like maybe subject to this on your end. How scary is this, and how does it play out in reality?
I would say for most people, it wasn't scary, and at various times it was between 6 to 10% of people had to be it. And exactly what's measured was a little different over time, of like whether or not you were like 6 to 10% had to be rated poorly, or 6 to 10% had to be put into like coaching or whatever, or 6 to 10% had to be fired. Sometimes different levels of goals in terms of like the cascading level of like, as you're managing people out, there's goals to hit. But I would say it wasn't scary for the vast majority of people, because you're looking ahead. You're thinking about, how do I get promoted? How do I, do these projects well so I can get ahead in my career? Yeah. I don't think you're I don't think most people are thinking I'm probably in the bottom 10% of all my peers, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think most people don't think that. You're not worried about being the bottom 10%. And I would say until it pops up, right? You move to a new team, your manager doesn't like you, and you think about like, my manager doesn't like me and seems to like all of my peers. Suddenly it becomes very scary because
I've actually heard this from people I know of the same story that they've been with Amazon for some time. Great. Either a new manager came or they moved to a new team. And that's when things became, I actually had a friend who was put on a PIP. He thought it was really unfair. He was there for 4 years. He actually made it out of it, but he kind of became bitter, especially towards his manager.
Almost never happens. Yeah.
He actually turned it around, but still.
Yeah. I think there's a few edge cases where people can make it out of PIPs, and mostly that I would say the vast majority of people who get out of those is something like a college hire. And, this is just a common thing. I make fun of college hires because of like how much they move from kids to adult over time, right? Like you're in college and you're a kid and then you become an adult. How many times they get hired and like they're 3 months into their job and I see them posting on Instagram at 4 a.m. and then the next day they don't show up to work and they're like, I was sick. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you were sick. Like alcohol poisoning is definitely an illness. Like that's kids, right? Like It's like, dude, you haven't done any work in 2 weeks and you're out late and you show up to work at 1 p.m. Like then you can get a PIP that you can get out of because they decide to buckle down and actually do their work.
Yep.
You let them back out because you think they're competent. They're just need to grow up. But if you think about like the incentives, right? You're running a team. I have 50 people working for me. Because usually the criteria of that like 6 to 10% is only if you're in a big enough org. So let's say I have 50 people. So now the criteria hits me because usually it's 50 or so when you start to have these expectations. If I need to rate 10% of my team poorly, let's say, and I have 50 people, it means I need to find 5 people. By the time the review period rolls around, I need to be like considering who's not doing great.
Review periods every 6 months, every 12 months?
12 months. Yeah.
12 months, yeah.
Yeah. And again, like at various times we had checkpoints, 6-month checkpoints. Sometimes HR would care that you're flagging people. Sometimes it's like for the most part, especially when you're talking about like firing people, it'd be like by the end of the year, you need to have fired 5 people. And sometimes it's like, well, we already did 4 along the year because of various things that happened. So that 5th one is the only one we're looking for. And so you're going through the review period with your 50 people and you need to find one person. It's not a big deal, right? You talk to, that would probably be like 7 or 8 managers at least. One of them has some employee who's not doing great, or one of your managers is annoying as hell. And so you like, now you're okay. But I would say it becomes an issue when your team, especially if your team is more stable, like if you're constantly hiring people, like there's always going to be new blood. Someone wasn't interviewed well. Someone's just like not at all suited to be here. And that makes it easy. When your team's more stable and you've been for the most part with the same people for 2 years and you're running into yet another review cycle and you're like, oh my God, like we already got rid of everyone who is not doing great. Everyone on my team is doing well. Now you end up in frustrating situations. Most of the time I would say it was not a big deal and wasn't that stressful because those expectations don't come into play until you have a bigger organization. So like you're a dev manager and you'd say, no, everyone on my team's good. And as long as you have backbone, you're okay with that. And then you get to be a senior manager and you have 47 people. The criteria doesn't apply to you still. Now, you start to have like, you have 47 people. You have no one underperforming. Are you sure? Like 47 people. Like now you start to get to the point where your manager sits down with you and says, let's go through and tell me the bottom 5 people of your org and why they don't deserve to be rated as least effective. And then you get to bigger orgs, and that's where you get this weird, like the organizational pressure of like, now you hit your director, I have 150 people reporting to me. I need to come up with 11 people who are in coaching by the end of the year or something. And like, now I sit down with my managers and say, okay, guys, like we have 8, I need 11. We have to talk through all the people who are like on that borderline and explain why they're not whatever at this level. Because for the most part, they were very, very hard asses on making sure that you hit these the goals.
And then from a software engineer perspective, you're kind of like blissfully unaware, you're kind of working away. And let's imagine that, like one day your manager probably had this like discussion with their director or, their manager, and they identified you as someone. Usually when this happens, like you kind of in your group, you circle down on like, all right, this is this person. These are the people who are underperforming.
Yep.
Is there also a part where there is like reasoning given of why, so that the manager can go back and say like, all right, here's the difference, here's why you're not meeting expectations? Or is it just more like, well, you're bottom of the pile, like, sorry, here's a pip?
So I guess the first thing to say is like there's often a definition issue. And even with the managers sometimes, like, boy, this is where managers screw up the most often. And you almost need like a bar raiser for HR processes. The description of that lowest rating and the description of letting people go is all about not meeting expectations. It is least effective. And so the argument is that we explain to people is, if we have 100 people, we want, let's just pick an easy number, the bottom 5%, 5 people out of that 100. We want the least effective of them. It doesn't mean not effective. It doesn't mean that they're not doing their job. But if you pick the bottom 5 people and say, would you rather keep them, or would you rather interview and find someone who might be just this amazing, awesome hire? And most of the time you would say, well, I mean, the bottom 5 out of 100 people aren't great. Like, they might be okay at their job.
Comparatively, right?
Comparatively, like they're a fine, let's just say, engineer, right? They're a fine engineer. Most people would get that work done in a week, and it takes them 2 weeks because they're slower. Like, it's just like, they're not great. Yeah. If their manager is doing well, their manager's been telling them this all along. Is like, hey, do you notice that your work is getting done slower than everyone else on the team, right? Because again, this is the bottom 5 of 100. Yep. Like, they're slower than everyone else. They're making more mistakes, like whatever it is that makes them at the bottom. Hopefully they've been getting feedback along the way. And then in this discussion that inevitably happened, right? You have all the managers in a room with their senior manager, maybe with the director, and you're having detailed discussions. And we're saying, okay, their productivity is lower. They make a lot of mistakes. Their peers complain a lot about them, because almost always there's like a lot of peer, like, I really don't want to work with Dave on this one because, boy, Dave always is slower and you have to do most of the work for Dave, right? So you had this collaborative discussion with whatever feedback you have available to say, okay, definitely Dave has to be in that bottom 5. Now, hopefully, again, the manager of Dave has been giving him feedback throughout the year. And maybe this happens not at the very end of the year. Like, preferably it's not just like all of a sudden, wham, everyone gets surprised. But if it has happened, then yes, the manager should be able to sit down and say, you are being rated as least effective, or you're being put into coaching, or whatever it is the step is, because here's the situation. You in the last 4 sprints, specifically in the last 4 sprints, you have missed your projects haven't been completed like we thought would be completed in the sprint, every single sprint for the last 4 sprints. We've already talked about this. The issue usually comes up is if the manager's been saying, you're awesome, you're awesome, you're awesome. And then suddenly you're like, terribly sorry, you're in coaching now because you're not awesome. And that's where I've actually heard quite a bit that the problem that some of the people that I talk with who were in the situation, their manager was new or did not understand and some of those things. But this does make sense. In some ways, it feels to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but this feels somewhat similar to Netflix in the sense of, Netflix is also very open about having the keeper tests where they regularly reevaluate people, and they're not saying you're not meeting expectations. They're just like, well, if someone is not, they actually do the other way around. They're saying if someone is not worth fighting for keeping, we don't necessarily want to retain them. In fact, we might let them go, and they communicate this up front. Whereas with Amazon, if I understand, they're saying you're the least effective, which, again, people got into Amazon. It's hard to get into. They're typically good engineers. They might be awesome at a lot of places, but Amazon says, okay, let's, we want to. This is their performance philosophy. Yeah. And I think a good number of the times, if you talk to someone and say, like, someone who's getting this kind of feedback, and they're saying, but I did complete that eventually, or something like that. And it's like, but do you agree that every person on the team would have gotten that done faster than you? Like, it's, well, yes. It's like, okay, so at least you would agree out of your 11 peers on the team that you are the slowest engineer. Like, it's like, I think people understand one of the hard things is just like the difference between least effective, which is just like, hey, at the bottom of the pile, you're going to be at risk. If you think, if you look around the room and you're thinking, yep, I'm the worst one here, that's not a great situation to ever be in. It's just never safe. And at Amazon, it's definitely not safe. At some other companies where they just might, do layoffs once every 4 years, you might be safe for quite a while. But Amazon has this sort of regular cycle.
Well, also, I feel some companies, and I wrote about this, I sense some companies are starting to become a bit more like Amazon. So Facebook has done 5% performance-based layoff for this time. I think Stripe was doing something similar. So previously, I think we saw there was these kind of golden years, if we will, when the job market was really good. Amazon kept doing this, and Amazon was really the kind of the bad company, if you will, the only one who were doing it besides Netflix.
Yeah.
And it seems to me Amazon hasn't changed anything, but some of the other companies are doing. So maybe as software engineers, we should accept that, like some of these top companies in terms of brand compensation, they're going to be tougher places to be at. And they'll just keep pushing people to do better, and they'll keep comparing people with one another.
Yeah. And in terms of like as an individual, if you're joining as an engineer or manager, anyone, I think one of the things to keep in mind in terms of like ego and like how does it feel to be told all of a sudden like you're not doing well, I guess partially is an like awareness of, I would actually say as a manager, even like 50% of that performance frequently is your relationship with your manager and like your team, how well you fit in with the team, with your peers, with your manager. So many times I've had someone who was either doing amazing on one team, they moved to the next team and they're like actually not doing well at all. Or someone who was not doing well escapes to another team before they get fired and they do well. Like I've had people who I was planning on firing who managed to transfer off my team in time and they ended up getting promoted someday. And the same thing, I've had people who said like, I'm about to be fired. I'm pretty sure that it's coming towards me. Can I get off this is like my sneaky recommendation for anyone is like, if you start to hear performance feedback whatsoever from your management chain, if you have any opportunity at all, get off your team fast as possible. Like that's the, as we frequently say, is like unfair thing that managers know is if your manager says, that wasn't so great what you did recently. It's like, okay, well, switching teams like fast as I can because most managers won't. Now, if you trust your manager, they might be actually just giving you honest feedback, which you'd like to be able to receive. But for the most part, if you've been working for someone for 3 years and suddenly they start giving you performance feedback, that's a really bad sign. If you run for the hills fast enough, it's possible you'll get away before they flag you in the system as non-transferable.
Yeah, and I guess it's just worth keeping in mind that for people who have not worked at these or companies, internal transfers are possible, and you do want to take advantage of them when it makes sense. It's still better to do or easier to do an internal transfer than to start a new job search process. To start, your network will. If you change companies, you'll have to start to rebuild your network and so on.
Yeah, and I think again, it frequently is not that you're a bad manager or a bad software engineer or a bad project manager or something. It's just, sometimes it doesn't work out with you and your manager. And I think the same thing, like if you're like, boy, I don't get along well with my manager, but I like this team, like that's not the safest thing to put up with. I've heard people saying that like my manager doesn't like me, but I really like what we're working on. I'm like, dude, get off the team. Like if you want to keep your job, get off the team.
I feel Amazon might make some of these kind of, universal truths a bit like more emphasized, because I remember like, for example, I worked at Microsoft at a time where Microsoft just didn't let people go. And there were people who were doing really bad. Like we knew like they were doing bad work, but for some reason management didn't want to let anyone go. So there were dead weight. But and by the way, when, actually when this policy, I wasn't there when it changed, but I heard when it changed, they were one of the first ones to let go and no one was surprised. But the point is like, this is usually how companies work in like either normal times or when times are a bit tougher. Right now, it is a bit tougher, and it's just good to prepare for that. So like speaking for myself, I was always paranoid in most of my companies, especially when I joined the first like 6 to 12 months I assumed I probably was not doing that good. So I tried to do my best and, hope that it was enough. Over time, you could become more comfortable. But as you said, I was as a manager as well. If you're not getting along with your manager, what you said, like you need to switch managers. Like try to fix it if you can, but if you can't, sometimes there's just not much you can do.
Yeah, I think that there's the mistake that people will sometimes make is like my manager doesn't influence my job that much because I can work independently, or I don't need to figure this out with my manager because I can work with my peers, or I have this great engineer on my team I can work with. But especially at a place like Amazon, like your manager is responsible for your rating, which is like tied directly into comp. Like they're definitely responsible for your promotion. Like you're never ever going to get promoted if your manager doesn't like you. And every year, at least, your manager needs to pick out a number of people who are not doing great. And so if you're not getting along with your manager, you need to fix it or you need to move on to another team. Like that's just a solid thing at Amazon. And there are bad managers. I think like half the time someone gets fired, it's probably because their manager is like, it's a relationship issue.
And I guess it's fair to say that this is specific to Amazon, and maybe it's some other companies you can get by. But I think it's fair to say the other thing as well, right? If you have a great manager, someone where you really click, they have your back, you've got your back, you work well together, it might be even worth like depending on the situation. But oftentimes I hear people following their managers to other companies. They joined a year later, they reach out, do you want to have a coffee? Guess what? They're going to be their right hand at that company as well. And I actually know people who have risen with, and these good managers usually, not always, but oftentimes they're good at getting ahead, especially because they do bring some of their team. So if you know, or if you have a good manager, or if you had in the past, just hit them up again. It's rare. Like it's not that easy to
totally.
have that.
If you've had no managers that you have a good enough relationship where you want to go move with them, then you've either had a really unfortunate choice of managers, or maybe you're having the issue with the relationship. Sometimes it's you, not them. But I've heard before for managers, especially as you get higher levels, like if they don't pull in a number of people into their org as soon as they transfer over, and like there's not a list of people ready to transfer over, then maybe there's an issue with that person, because you want them to say, every time I move groups, I would frequently start off with how many open roles am I going to have? Because I have a number of people who I want, who will be happy to come over and join and take all those open positions. And that's what you expect. That's what you should have. And especially within Amazon, that's a totally expected thing is the person comes over and then suddenly like all the spots fill up with the people who have followed them for the last 3 org moves. And that's just, And it's a good way to shuffle. I think it's healthy, especially, at companies like Amazon where you want fresh blood and new ideas, new thoughts. Like it's a good way of, orgs sort of shuffle around. Your VP leaves and suddenly half your management team leaves. Like that's a good thing. That means the VP was liked by some people. They move off to somewhere else to bring some new ideas in, and then you get a whole fresh swath of new hires. So
I'm getting a sense that Amazon, and obviously I got this sense when I was researching Amazon, but talking to you even more so, that Amazon is just not a typical what you would expect a large company to be. And one thing I've noticed that I think underscores this is when startups hire from large tech companies, when I'm talking with founders or people who have hired in the past or engineers who work with them, there's a lot of eye rolling, like, oh, we hired that person from Google and it didn't really work out at a small company, or Meta or some other companies. One thing that I rarely hear is that this Amazon hire didn't work out. In fact, I see so many Amazon people go to, either large tech companies, and then they like some that even have like maybe a shinier brand like Google, Meta, OpenAI, etc., and they do pretty well there. But they also go to startups and they do pretty well there as employees, not just as founders. Why do you think this is? I mean, I think we've already touched on a few things why it could be, because Amazon feels a bit like a scrappy startup, even though it's a big company.
I mean, corporate wide is not a scrappy startup. It's a big old behemoth that can't turn to save its life. So when you, not that I'm biased or anything, but sometimes like HR policies and stuff, like, with a few Amazon wide things, it's like, good luck freaking changing anything. It's like banging my head against the wall so many times trying to get things changed. So corporate wide, they're not. But when you get down to a dev team, like I loved the fact of like almost everything is controllable at the lowest possible level. And so, everything from stupid changes people can make or awesome changes that they can make, that you have a lot of control at every individual dev team can pick their process, can pick their coding language, can pick how they're deploying their code, like what tools they're going to use. And sometimes it becomes stupid. Like it's just like there was a team that built their whole very important middleware like service out of Lisp, and it's like, what are they thinking? Like it is
why?
A cool language to use. I mean, it's sure, but no one else knows the damn language. Like no one else has written anything in Lisp, and like no one knows what you're doing. And I think it was like 2 engineers on the team had this great idea, and they were at the whole damn service, and like great, they built the service, and then they all transferred off the team. And then they had to rewrite the code because no one knew how to support it. And it was this nightmare. But they could, right? And thankfully, no one came up with an Amazon-wide policy saying you're not allowed to write anything except if it's in Java or something. So teams would regularly build stuff in whatever language they want, in whatever tool set they want, at whatever pace they want. They can do Agile, they could do Waterfall, they can do Scrum, or they can not do sprints. They can do... I liked the fact that unless there's a strong reason for something to be dictated by Amazon or VP or director or whatever else, for the most part, the culture was, you can't tell me what to do, like in a good way. As in like, the director would say something like, once in a while you'd hear someone say something like, why don't we line up all the sprints? And everyone just starts stomping their feet saying, hell no, you can't. They want to do a 3-week sprint, but we like 4-week sprints or whatever it is. And it's like, I use that as an example because that did happen a couple of times where like someone thought like, what we should do is line up all the sprints across our organization, and all the engineers are like, oh,
it does sound like a nightmare as a dev. Yeah.
And I appreciate, like, I really like that culture of like, someone says we should all flip to Macs and like, no, I like my Windows laptop. Why? Because I do. Or like someone else has a Linux laptop. It's like, well, I'm just going to do that because I feel like it. And unless there's a reason to dictate it, like a really, really strong reason, the default answer is just everything goes to the lowest level. And so again, like you're on call because it's your software, and it feels in most cases like you're in a 7-person startup or a 10-person startup, because like you picked your language, you picked your how you deploy it, you picked how you QA it, you picked how you monitor it, you set your own monitors and alarms. It's not like there's some global Amazon click the alarm button like, oh God, no, like you have to make all this stuff up, and people make it up wrong, but you learn, right? I think there's a lot of skills like I can't name the exact gaps, but sometimes I would talk to the Facebook engineers and like they've never dealt with an emergency of like how fast, it's like, where are alarms, that was like an example. Was I said something about like, where are your metrics and stuff like that for the system? And they're like, I don't know. I'll have to go look for them. And I'm like, blew my mind, because if you're an Amazon engineer, you have a freaking hot link on your browser, right? Because you have to click the button really fast when there's an emergency and see all your alarms. And they better be on like one big dashboard with the alarms that you know about and the metrics you know about, because you support this system and you know exactly how everything works. And you know that your memory usage is higher than usual. So what the heck is going on? And so I think it just builds a lot of skills at that like really low level of like, we own the whole stack, we own the product. We, frequently like you're making product decisions because there's not enough product managers for your space or things like that. So on the frugality side of things, for example.
Well, so I'm sensing that you're like, as an Amazon engineer, you're actually really close to, the metal, the work. You're in a small team. You have a lot of ownership. Your whole team. You have to wear multiple hats. You cannot afford to buy all sorts of use budget because Amazon doesn't want you to. Plus,
that's not my problem. Is something that that's one of the quotes in the leadership principle is like you can't say like that's a product decision and like go la la la. I don't want to make a decision. Like, no, dude. Like, sorry, you're an engineer. I know, but you have to make this product decision now.
And then you also need to listen to customers and stay close to them.
Yeah.
Which is already, I guess, like, like a startup founder would like say, like, these are my ideal folks. Plus, on top of it, when you leave any big company, Google, Meta, maybe even Microsoft, you're used to internal tools that do not exist outside of the world. Yeah. But with Amazon, especially these days, you're using AWS. Guess which one is the most popular
if you're lucky,
cloud service?
I would say both lucky, but also I definitely heard teams at Amazon switching to publicly available tools, in part because they say, I wanted to learn this. Yeah. Like, this is a popular tool these days, which is, again, is like one of those big advantages of a system like Amazon, where you can just choose to use whatever you want. Is someone saying the hot new way of doing Android development is X, so we're going to do that for this next project because we, us collectively on this team want to learn that tool, so we're going to use it. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. Like, that's such a good way of keeping on top of tech, is being able to say, we're just going to use whatever we want, and we've read a lot about this thing. It looks like it's popular, so we're going to try it out.
This is awesome. I mean, my view changed a little bit about Amazon, because it just seems like, unlike some big tech jobs that you either go to big tech or become a founder, Amazon does open multiple paths. You can keep going on in larger tech companies. You can found a startup because you've kind of seen how it's done. You can join a startup. You can join a scale up. Pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think the downside, which I would say absolutely exists at Amazon, is related to the independence thing of like everyone can do whatever they want is imagine the manager who says, we're going to be working on these projects. No, we can't go do that operational excellence. We're just going to put 2 people on call and we'll get paid 17 times a week. And like, there's not the Uber Amazon policy holder who says like, you manager are doing it wrong. You need to be fired right now.
Yeah.
Like, so you do end up with these pockets of just absolute horribleness because people can do whatever they want. And so once in a while you talk to someone and you hear about what it's like on their team. And I'm like, that sounds horrific. Like, I can't believe your team sucks so much. And so when someone says, you'll see on Reddit or something about like, oh my God, don't go to Amazon. Everyone leaves after 6 months. I mean, they don't. Like, the actual stats are not at all like that.
But in some pockets they do.
But in some pockets they do. Absolutely. I have met teams that had no one, like 13 engineers on one team. No one had a tenure of more than 12 months because they all left. They were all leaving. People would join the team, realize how terrible it was, and they'd transfer off. And it just pop on, pop off, pop on, pop off because the team was terrible. The manager was bad. Their senior manager wasn't paying attention. Like, there are these pockets of terribleness. And so again, on the like, if you're in a bad spot, move somewhere else. Internal transfers are great. And I assure you, like, I was in 6 orgs. I had a bad manager, I guess sort of like 2 bad managers. They were both fired. Like, everywhere else was great. Like, and those places became great after I had new managers. And so I had great managers. We had great orgs, great peers, and you would just see pockets of terribleness here or there. But that's almost like the inevitable downside of having thousands of little startups around the way is like once in a while you end up with a really bad situation.
I know you had a short stint at Facebook as well, but in total, how long did you spend at Amazon?
I think it was a little over 12 years at Amazon.
A little over 12 years at Amazon, a bit of Facebook. Afterwards, you had a little stint at...
I took a leave of absence towards the end. I took a leave. And
then you worked at Bezos Academy for a little bit as well. But then you made a decision to retire. What then? And you're still young. You don't look 65 to me. So how did you decide on retiring? And like, what did it take to build up a kind of financial independence to be able to do this? And what do you do right now? So many years ago, I have no idea how I got so lucky that I stumbled on the idea of financial independence and read a bunch about it and learned math, like financial math in terms of like withdrawal rates and investment things and index funds and stuff. And so many, many years ago, and in my 30s or whatever, I guess that's a while ago, I early 30s, let's say, I realized like how much money I would need and like keep an eye on our expenses every year and stuff like that. And so Amazon pays well, stocks go up, like over time, if you're making tech salary, go up.
They used to back in the day, back in my day, stocks
hopefully they will.
They did, hopefully they will again someday. And I would say almost like as for tech workers, it's like keeping an eye on your expenses is probably more important than keeping an eye on your income because you're probably making enough to retire if you don't spend a lot. And so thankfully my wife and I don't, and it comes down to that kind of thing. And so a good number of years ago, I built 8 years ago, I built a spreadsheet and I could tell about when we would have enough money where I wouldn't need to work anymore. And that was my position when I was getting promoted to director at Amazon. I could see like essentially like my next vestings make us way past my safety margin. And so I don't need to work anymore. And so there's just like that fundamental, like, what am I going to do with my life when I don't need to work? I can keep working. I enjoy working, like some aspects of it. Like I don't like waking up in the morning and commuting sucks. But I really appreciate sometimes like hanging out with smart people and talking to them or doing creative things. So Bezos Academy poached me out of Amazon at a convenient time when I didn't need to work anymore. And I was having a little bit of that existential crisis of what do I do next with my life? So they poached me. I worked there for a bit and then ended up deciding that that's not like the right kind of job for me. And so I thought, well, like my dream since I was young was to write a book. Actually like fiction book. I want to write sci-fi or fantasy about dragons and stuff. But how do you force yourself to write? Because I've been wanting to write for years and I have like literally 20 stories of like 50 pages each. And so I thought, well, how do you force yourself to write regularly? Newsletter is an obvious answer. So I'd written years before, while I was at Amazon, I'd written a few very popular articles on LinkedIn. that just sort of blew up. One of them was the main one, in fact, was like the Amazon Leadership Principles article that a lot of people know about.
Yep.
Where I'd written an article, I'd written an email that I would forward to people when friends or family or relatives or whatever else said, hey, I want to interview at Amazon. I'd forward them this email that essentially said, here's what you need to know about interviewing at Amazon. So I turned that into an article on LinkedIn, and it became wildly popular. And so I thought, well, why don't I do that more? Like, that's sort of fun. I'll do a newsletter for a bit. I started a newsletter, and like by the second or third article, I had like thousands of subscribers, and I was like, holy smokes. Okay, well, I need to write a paid newsletter is what I need to do just for fun. And this was literally like, I just see the tools where I can click paid and say like, you could pay, and like, how much should they pay me? I don't know, $5. So I just pushed some buttons and said, I thought, well, I'll just write 2 articles a week then. So things have changed over time, but in general, it just blew up. And for a while it was, I'm going to write a new article.
And this is Scarlet Ink, right?
This is Scarlet Ink. Yeah. So the short thing for Scarlet Ink is I got that, domain a long time ago when I thought like I want to do some kind of writing, a blog, a newsletter, a book, or something. I wanted red ink because I always like the red pens at Amazon when I mark up documents. Document culture, right? You sit there like with a piece of paper in front of you, and I'd always use the red pens because I could see it better against the black printouts. And so I thought red ink, but red ink was taken and it was really expensive to buy the domain. So I thought Scarlet, it's even more literary.
Yeah,
Scarlet Ink. It sounds really fancy. So I got Scarlet Ink. I wrote the Scarlet Ink newsletter. It was really fun. And I was writing for a bit, and I kept saying and thinking like, I'm just sort of on a sabbatical where I'm writing, and then I'll figure out what I want to do for a job. Like, do I want to take another nonprofit job? Do I want to go to a startup? Do I want to go to, I don't know, Google or Microsoft or something? And I did a couple small interviews. I talked to some people at Google. I talked to some people at other companies, and it was like, meh. But the newsletter kept growing. And then you start to get to the point of like, but why would I go to a company again when I'm making, so like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I sort of crossed where we were making in my newsletter more than we were spending. And so like, I haven't actually withdrawn any of my retirement money, it's only grown because I don't need to touch it because I have this newsletter going. And then it gets to this weird point of like, why would I go get a job when I'm writing a newsletter that already pays me a salary? And I'm not spending all that much time on it. I'm not commuting. I'm sitting in my little office here writing one article. I end up writing like 1 article a week. I enjoy writing. I sit down, I write for a few hours. Sometimes I'll write over a period of a few days. Like I'll just, sit down for a couple hours, write something, brainstorm. I'll be on a walk and I'll text myself an idea of something I could write about. And so you sort of like the idea of getting a job fades away when you realize you have so many other things you can do in life. Sitting in the office and being forced to do it for 40 plus hours a week doesn't sound quite appealing.
So it sounds like you built up really good savings as a mix of just working in big tech, being at a good time where like there were stocks awarded, where
back when stocks went up.
It was appreciation, but you also read upon financial independence, the planning. You actually started to make a plan, and then there was this point where you crossed the boundary where like, okay, you are financially stable and you could afford not to work. You kind of explored some things, different things, like the nonprofit job at the Basis Academy, whether you should work at other companies. And then you just did something that kind of like just worked out. It sounds like because you didn't, is it fair to say that maybe it worked out because you just didn't really have the pressure? I mean, if this like once a week newsletter didn't work out, you probably would try something else, right? Because you have no pressure right now.
Yeah, if you imagine, and it's, I don't know if it's responsible for the newsletter working out, the fact that I didn't need it. I mean, if I really wanted to make it work, it probably would have worked also. I think a little bit of what might have happened was if you're not trying to impress people, your work product for creative things is probably a bit better because I don't try to appeal to like, what do people really want to hear? Like, what's the hot topic? Like I've only written about AI like once or twice, like I think only once, like an article about AI, which is mostly saying like, no, it's all overblown, which I still believe in. But I think that for the most part, it's like you're writing about the things that you think are interesting or what someone else has talked to you about. And you're like, oh, that was such a cool thing. I did actually some like one-on-one coaching for a while too. Like that was like one of those side things once I started writing and I had a lot of free time.
I think when we first met, you were still doing a little bit of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was doing hourly coaching, and then my wife and I argued about it because it was like I was making a lot of money doing hourly coaching, and I kept raising my rates, and she's like, "Stop it! You're not going to get any more work." I'm like, "Well, I know, because I don't want to be doing this anymore." So I kept raising the rates, trying to send people away, and then I started feeling guilty because I was making such a huge amount of money per hour, and people were still signing up for it. But then you start to have this like performance pressure of like, "Am I worth that many? That much money? Like, oh my gosh! Like, holy crap!" So I lowered the rates a little bit, and then people were still buying, and I ended up just turning it off. I just told everyone like, "Sorry, I'm not getting joy out of it anymore, and I don't know why I'm doing it." It's a weird existential problem to run into when you like realize that incremental money won't change anything other than like a nicer car or something, which is like fundamentally something like if you feel that way, like this is how you reach financial independence, is not to keep growing your spending. Because a lot of people will be like, I got a raise, so I spend more.
Yeah.
If you stop that from happening at the right time, then as your career improves and you make more and more money, the only thing it's doing is increasing your savings rate. And that's how, if you have a good tech job, over time, like you can afford things and save 15%. And the next time, your next raise, you can save 20% of your salary, and then 25, and then 40, and then by the end, my wife was working at Amazon, which is partially how this happened. I mean, she retired a couple years before me, but we had two tech workers. We were saving like 85%, I think, of our income. Like you can retire pretty damn fast if you're saving 85% of what you make.
And then where did you learn about financial independence, or for people who are thinking about like, okay, I'm actually inspired, I'd like to learn more. Where did you start? And do you have some pointers of books, resources?
Yeah, the internet. I would say, Mr. Money Mustache, and he doesn't write as much anymore, but you could definitely, he has some pretty fantastic archives. The Mr. Money Mustache is a blog, newsletter. Mad Fientist was another one who also, he's been retired for years. It's sort of funny, like these financial independence newsletters in particular are just sort of hilarious because they'll be like, I have, $10,000 and I want to retire in 5 years. And so they write like mad for 5 years. And they're like, I've made it. Like, I think I've made it. And then you notice like the newsletters just sort of peters out and stops. Like they'll write once every 2 months because they're busy with their life. And like, they're the driving force
that's
behind.
What they wanted to do.
It was their thing. So almost no active newsletter exists that was from the time of which I originally read about it. But yeah, Mr. Money Mustache, Mad Fientist, are the biggest ones that I read about at the time. But there's a good selection of actually, if you hold on one second, I was going to look up the book. I can look it up right now. There's a book that I recommend on my website, in fact.
You can set it over, and then we'll put it in the show notes
afterwards. Put it in the show notes, yeah.
This was really fun.
Yeah,
both about software engineering and a little bit reflecting on management. We didn't go into too much detail this time, but perhaps on a follow-up one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for being here. This was fun.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun. I enjoy chatting on these topics.
I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into how engineers at Amazon work, as well as how working at a large tech company like Amazon could help getting to early retirement like Dave has done so. Thanks to Dave for a great conversation. You can read more from him on his newsletter at scarletink.com, and you can find him on social media as linked in the show notes below. We previously did a more detailed deep dive on the engineering culture at Amazon. Check it out, linked in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. This helps more people discover the podcast, and a special thank you if you leave a rating. Thanks, and see you in the next one.